Have you ever had a moment where you sat quietly in your room, finally detached from the noise of everyday life, only to be struck by a strange sense of unfamiliarity, as if the life you're living doesn't truly belong to you? You complete tasks, respond to messages, maintain relationships, exchange polite smiles. Everything seems normal on the surface. Yet, in the quietest corner of your heart, a small voice whispers, "Is this really me?" You might not even remember when this feeling began. Perhaps it started in school, when your major was chosen for you or your behavior dictated by others. Maybe it came later, when adult life became a numb routine of what's considered normal. Or maybe it was a fleeting moment when you caught your own gaze in the mirror and realized it wasn't a vibrant soul staring back, but a shadow performing the role of a qualified person. Since childhood, we've been taught to do the right thing and be outstanding. So we learn to suppress impulses, hide emotions, and imitate the versions of good kids, good students, or good employees, seen through adult eyes. We began to build a shell, a version of ourselves that would be accepted, praised, and liked. This version was shaped by parents, teachers, and peers. We used it to face the world and gradually forgot the unfiltered self beneath it. And so each day we wake up not as a person, but as a character, performing a script written by others' expectations. We repeat the same lines, feel the same scripted emotions. Even fatigue becomes a rehearsed response. We try to smile to meet expectations, to feel content with life. But in the quiet of night, that unspeakable emptiness and suffocation begins to rise. You're not alone in this state. In fact, this is one of the most common yet least acknowledged pains of modern life, living as the person others want you to be while your true self becomes increasingly blurred. Carl Jung had profound insight into this. He noted that this state, living out someone else's script, is a kind of personality split, a disconnect between the true self and the social role. This fracture may not be obvious in daily life, but it seeps silently into your thoughts, emotions, even your body. You feel exhausted for no clear reason, lonely in crowds, endlessly chasing success and recognition, yet something inside remains empty. The real question isn't, am I good enough? It's, am I living authentically? You might realize you've been fulfilling others' desires all along, getting into a certain school, landing a stable, good job, building an envied family, becoming the version of yourself that earns the most likes online. What we pursue is society's template of success, not the voice of our inner calling. We strive to be the ideal someone, but never ask ourselves, what do I truly want? Have you ever questioned whether the things you think you like are actually your own preferences? Is the failure you fear truly your fear, or your fear of how others will see you? Are your life goals fueled by the longing of your soul, or dictated by external standards? Awakening isn't a sudden explosion. It's the accumulation of subtle discomforts and doubts that eventually ignite a powerful self-inquiry. Who am I? Why am I living this way? If I could start over, would I choose the same life? These questions are unsettling, but they are also the gateway to authenticity, because only when you realize you're wearing a mask can you begin to search for the real you. But let's be honest here, the journey to find yourself is not easy. It's not as simple as changing careers or moving cities. It may demand that you confront vulnerabilities, fears, anger, and regrets you've never acknowledged. It may mean dismantling the ideal image you've spent decades constructing. This is a journey, not an escape from reality, but a movement toward a more authentic self. It's not about rejecting your past, but about rewriting your life script with understanding and strength. Each of us is given a one-of-a-kind life, and the deepest mission of that life is not to be someone else's perfect answer, but to become the unique and whole me. If you felt a quiet tremor while reading these words, it's no coincidence. That is your inner self softly responding, "I'm still here. Whenever you're ready, I'm waiting to meet you again." Have you ever caught yourself acting like a different person depending on where you are or who you're with? Maybe you're charming and agreeable at work, reserved at home, loud with old friends, and curated on social media. It's subtle, often unconscious, but it's there. That shifting identity is what Carl Jung called the persona, the social mask we wear to fit in, to survive, and to be loved. From a very young age, we're taught that some parts of us are acceptable and others aren't. We learn to smile when we feel like crying, to stay polite when we're angry, to agree when we want to object. In school, at home, in the workplace, there are spoken and unspoken rules about how we should behave, what we should say, and even what we should feel. So, what do? We adapt. We start crafting a version of ourselves that can navigate this world without too much friction. We become the good student, the strong one, the reliable friend, the perfect partner. These roles aren't inherently bad. They help us form relationships and function in society. But here's the problem. The longer we wear the mask, the easier it is to forget that it's a mask. Over time, the persona becomes so ingrained that we start to believe it's who we really are. But it's not. It's a survival strategy, not a soul. It's a carefully constructed image, not a full expression of your truth. And when we begin to identify solely with this image, we lose touch with the messy, contradictory, vibrant, and real parts of ourselves. Jung warned us, the persona is necessary but dangerous. Necessary because without it, we would be vulnerable in a world that demands social order. Dangerous because if we cling to it too tightly, it will replace our authentic self. Let's be clear, there's nothing wrong with having a social identity. Everyone does. Problems arise when that identity becomes a prison. Think for a moment. How many times have you smiled just to avoid conflict? How often have you stayed silent when your truth wanted to be spoken? How many decisions have you made not because they felt right, but because they looked right? These compromises, repeated over time, carve a deep gap between the person you are and the person you show. And eventually, that gap becomes a void, one you can't explain but always feel. A quiet sadness, a nagging dissatisfaction, a sense that life is happening, but you're not truly in it. The persona thrives on external validation. It craves praise, status, and approval. But these things, while sweet, are fleeting. They can never replace the deep fulfillment that comes from being seen and loved for who you truly are. Not for the mask, but for the human beneath it. And here's the hardest part to swallow. Most of us didn't choose our mask. It was shaped for us by our family, our culture, our fears. Maybe you grew up in a home where emotions were seen as weakness, so you learned to always appear strong. Maybe you were rewarded for being obedient, so you learned to suppress rebellion. Over time, you began to mistake these behaviors for your identity, but they're not you. They are strategies you adopted to be safe, to be accepted, to survive. So what happens when you finally ask, who am I, when I'm not performing? That's when the journey begins, not away from the persona, but through it. The goal isn't to destroy the mask, it's to stop being enslaved by it, to use it consciously when needed, but never confuse it with your essence. Ironically, the more you become yourself, the less you need the persona to protect you. You begin to show up with fewer filters. You start to speak more honestly. You say no when you mean it. You laugh louder, cry more freely, love more openly. You begin to trust that your real self, not your polished self, is enough. And that's where true connection lives. Not in the performance, but in the presence. Not in perfection, but in vulnerability. Still, this path takes courage. To question the persona is to risk rejection. It's to admit that you may not be who others believe you are. And that can feel terrifying, especially if your entire life has been built around that identity. But ask yourself this: is it worth living a life that looks good, but feels hollow? Is acceptance worth it if it costs your authenticity? Because here's the truth. When you live entirely through the persona, you may earn applause, but you'll lose your soul in the process. The mask may bring you comfort, but it will never bring you peace. So, what now? Now is the time to become curious. Start noticing when you're slipping into character. Start paying attention to the parts of yourself that you've hidden away. Start listening to the quiet voice that whispers, "There's more to me than this," because there is. And the deeper you go, the more you'll remember. You are not the role you play. You are not the expectations you meet. You are not the mask you wear to be loved. You are something infinitely more real. And you're closer to it than you think. What if I told you that the parts of yourself you're most afraid of, the anger, the jealousy, the shame, the wild impulses, are not your enemies, but your greatest teachers? Carl Jung called this hidden part of the psyche the shadow, the collection of traits, desires, and emotions that we've repressed, denied, or rejected, often since childhood. The shadow isn't evil. It's simply unseen. It's everything we don't want to be, but are. Everything we've pushed away, hoping it would disappear. But here's the hard truth. What you refuse to face doesn't go away. It festers in the dark. It grows stronger in silence. And eventually, it finds its way out. Through anger that explodes, relationships that collapse, addictions that spiral, or a deep sense of shame you can't quite name. The shadow is not a monster. It's the wounded child you've locked in the basement, and it's time to open the door. Let's rewind. When we were children, we were raw, unfiltered, alive. We expressed emotion freely. We said what we felt. But not everything we expressed was met with acceptance. Maybe you showed sadness and were told to stop crying. Maybe you got angry and were labeled difficult. Maybe you asked too many questions and were called annoying. Maybe you were told that sensitivity made you weak. So, you adapted. You buried the parts that didn't get love. You learned to smile instead of shout, to perform instead of feel, to hide instead of speak. And slowly, a whole side of you was cast into the unconscious. That's the shadow. But here's where it gets dangerous. Just because it's unconscious doesn't mean it's inactive. The shadow doesn't sit quietly. It leaks out in unexpected ways. You lash out at a loved one for a minor mistake. You sabotage a relationship right when it gets close. You envy someone's success, but pretend you don't care. You overreact to criticism and don't understand why. These moments aren't random. They are shadow eruptions, signals from your psyche that something inside is begging to be acknowledged. And the longer you ignore it, the more chaotic those eruptions become. Ironically, much of the pain we experience in life isn't because we're broken. It's because we're split. We've fractured ourselves into acceptable and unacceptable pieces. And that fracture is the source of our suffering. But here's the shift Jung offered us. The shadow is not your enemy. It's your gateway to wholeness. In fact, many of the qualities we hide away are not weaknesses. They're sources of power. Your suppressed anger? It may hold the boundary-setting strength you've been missing. Your denied ambition. It might be the key to your purpose. Your ignored vulnerability. It could be the doorway to intimacy and connection. What if the very things you're ashamed of are the parts of you that want to make you whole? Of course, confronting the shadow is not easy. It asks you to look at everything you've been taught to reject, to feel emotions you've spent years avoiding, to admit that, yes, you are jealous sometimes, you feel rage, you crave validation, you are not always kind or patient or noble, and that's okay. Because healing doesn't happen through perfection, it happens through integration. You don't overcome your shadow by pretending it doesn't exist. You overcome it by meeting it face to face and saying, I see you, I won't run anymore. That's where the work begins, shadow work, inner confrontation, radical honesty. It doesn't mean you act on every dark impulse, it means you acknowledge them, understand where they come from, and choose how to respond consciously. That's maturity, that's freedom. And there's more. Some of what's in your shadow isn't even dark at all. It's your light that was never allowed to shine. Maybe you were told you were too much, so you dimmed your fire. Maybe you were told you weren't smart or talented enough, so you stopped trying. Maybe you were told to be realistic, so you buried your dreams. The shadow holds not only your wounds, but your hidden potential. And reclaiming that lost potential is one of the most empowering things you will ever do. So, how do you begin? Start by observing your reactions. What triggers you? Who irritates you the most? The people you judge harshly often mirror something you haven't accepted in yourself. Look at your emotional outbursts, your recurring patterns, your inexplicable fears. They're not random, they're maps. They lead you back to the parts of yourself that are crying out for attention. And don't do it alone. Therapy, journaling, dream analysis, inner child work, these are tools to help navigate the underworld of your psyche safely and compassionately. Remember, shadow work is not self-punishment, it's self-recovery. Jung once wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is the work, not to escape the dark, but to bring light into it. Not to deny what's painful, but to finally give it a voice. When you begin to integrate your shadow, you will notice something incredible. You feel more whole, more real, more grounded. You stop reacting and start responding. You begin to forgive yourself. You begin to forgive others. And most of all, you begin to reclaim your true power. Because the shadow doesn't make you bad. It makes you human. And being fully human is the first step to becoming fully alive. What if the real journey of your life isn't about becoming more successful, more liked, or more productive, but about becoming more you? Carl Jung believed that the deepest purpose of human life isn't conformity or comfort, it's wholeness. And to become whole, we must undergo a profound inner journey, a journey he called individuation. Individuation isn't about becoming perfect. It's not about building a flawless identity or reaching some spiritual ideal. It's about integrating all the parts of yourself, your light and your darkness, your strength and your fear, your dreams and your doubts, into one cohesive, authentic being. It's not a path you walk once. It's a path you walk for life. Think of it like this. Most people spend their lives playing roles: student, employee, parent, partner, filling in the blanks of a script they didn't write. And for a while that works. You fit in, you function, you meet expectations. But somewhere along the way, a deep restlessness begins to grow. You start to feel like you're just going through the motions, like something essential is missing, like you've traded your truth for approval. That's not failure, that's the invitation. That's your soul knocking on the door, whispering, there's more. More than roles, more than expectations, more than performance. And this is where individuation begins. not as a philosophy, but as a calling. The process of individuation is both mystical and practical. It begins with awareness, realizing that the life you're living may not be fully yours. From there, you start to peel back the layers, the persona you wear to be accepted, the shadow you've hidden to avoid rejection, the voices of your past that still echo in your decisions. This peeling is not comfortable. It's not glamorous. It's not something you can post on Instagram. It's often painful, confusing, and isolating. Because individuation means becoming an individual, someone who is no longer shaped entirely by collective values or external validation. It requires that you ask hard questions. Who am I beyond my roles? What do I truly want, not what I've been told I should want? Which parts of me have I abandoned in order to fit in? As you dive inward, you'll begin to see that your psyche is not a singular unified voice, but a chorus. There's the inner child, the rebel, the dreamer, the protector, the saboteur. There are parts of you that scream for freedom, and others that cling to control. Individuation is the process of listening to all these voices, not to silence them, but to understand and integrate them. It's like tuning an orchestra. Each instrument matters, even the dissonant ones, especially the dissonant ones. Because the goal isn't harmony through uniformity. The goal is authenticity through integration. Jung believed that at the core of each person is the self, not the ego, not the persona, not the fragmented voices, but a deeper, wiser center that holds the blueprint of who you are meant to become. The self isn't built, it's discovered. It's not invented, it's revealed. But the self doesn't show itself to those who refuse the inner work. To encounter the self, you must be willing to confront your illusions, accept your contradictions, reclaim what you've rejected, surrender who you thought you were. This is not about finding answers out there. It's about cultivating silence, reflection, and presence in here. It's about noticing what energizes you, what drains you, what awakens you. It's about choosing to live in alignment with your deepest truth, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Here's the paradox. Individuation is deeply personal, but it's not selfish. In fact, it's the most responsible thing you can do. Why? Because the more you become yourself, the less you project your pain onto others. The more you own your darkness, the less you blame the world. The more you accept your flaws, the more compassion you can offer. A person who has begun the process of individuation is like a tree with deep roots, grounded, resilient, and capable of offering shade to others without losing its own structure. But why don't more people walk this path? Because it's scary. Individuation demands that you give up the comfort of imitation. It asks you to step outside the collective script. It may cost you the approval of others, the identity you built, or even relationships that can't survive your growth. But ask yourself, what's the alternative? A life of quiet compromise? A life that looks fine on the outside, but feels numb on the inside? A life where you never truly know who you are? That's the price of ignoring the call. The good news is, individuation doesn't require dramatic moves. It begins with small acts of self-honesty, saying no when you mean no, admitting when you're hurt, choosing what energizes your spirit, not just what earns applause, noticing the difference between the voice of fear and the voice of intuition. It's a path of 1,000 little moments, each one bringing you a step closer to your real self. And you don't have to do it all at once. You just have to start, to listen, to feel, to be willing. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who you were trained to be, not who the world expects, not who earns the most approval, but the person who, deep down, you've always known yourself to be." That's the essence of individuation. It's not a goal, it's a path, and you're already on it. Have you ever wondered why certain stories move you so deeply? Why you see yourself in a movie character? Or why a myth you've heard 100 times still gives you chills? It's not random. It's not just relatable. It's something deeper, something ancient. Carl Jung believed that embedded within each of us are universal patterns, primordial images passed down through generations of human experience. He called them archetypes, the fundamental building blocks of the psyche. And here's what's truly fascinating. They're not learned. You were born with them. These archetypes live in what Jung called the collective unconscious, a vast psychological inheritance shared by all humans, regardless of culture, time, or upbringing. They shape the way we think, feel, and act, whether we realize it or not. Some of the most common archetypes include the hero, the one who faces trials, overcomes obstacles, and seeks transformation. The caregiver, the one who sacrifices and nurtures others, often at their own expense. The rebel, the one who challenges authority and breaks the rules. The sage, the seeker of wisdom and truth. The lover, the one who longs for union, intimacy, and beauty. The orphan, the abandoned one who yearns for belonging and security. You've seen these figures in stories, in religions, in fairy tales, in films. But more importantly, you've lived them. Because archetypes don't just exist out there, they live within you. Maybe you've spent years playing the hero, always strong, always striving, never showing weakness. Or maybe you've become the caregiver, always putting others first until there's nothing left for yourself. Maybe you've felt the pull of the rebel, fighting systems you don't believe in, even when it costs you. Or the orphan, longing for acceptance, terrified of abandonment, constantly seeking connection. These roles often feel natural, familiar, safe, but they're also incomplete. The danger arises when you over-identify with one archetype and ignore the rest. When you believe, "This is who I am," without questioning where that identity came from or what it may be suppressing. Let's say you've always been the strong one, the reliable one, the achiever. That sounds admirable, until you realize you've never given yourself permission to be vulnerable. You've never allowed yourself to fall apart, to ask for help, to admit you're scared. Or maybe you've always been the peacekeeper, the nice one, the selfless one. But deep down, you carry repressed anger, unspoken resentment, a voice that says, "I matter too," but has never been allowed to speak. These unbalanced archetypes create inner tension. You feel stuck, confused, emotionally drained. You wonder why certain relationships feel one-sided, why the same patterns repeat, why you're doing everything right, but still feel wrong. That's not failure, that's fragmentation. And individuation, the journey to your true self, requires that you stop living inside just one room of your inner house. It asks you to explore the others, to invite in the voices you've silenced, to balance what's been dominating you. But how do you know which archetypes are influencing you? Pay attention to your emotional triggers. Who do you admire and why? Who do you envy and what do they represent? What kinds of people irritate you and what might they reflect? Often, the archetypes that are strongest in you show up in the people you admire, and the ones you've disowned, they often show up in the people you judge. Also, pay attention to your dreams. Jung believed dreams are the language of the unconscious, and archetypes speak fluently in that language. Recurring figures, symbols, or emotional themes often reflect parts of yourself that are trying to emerge or be integrated. Here's a key truth. You do not choose your archetypes, they choose you, but you can choose how consciously you engage with them. And once you start working with them, bringing them into awareness, you begin to move from being a character in someone else's story to being the author of your own. This isn't about becoming one archetype and rejecting the others. It's about learning to balance them. Let your hero act when courage is needed. Let your caregiver love, but set boundaries. Let your rebel question, but also listen. Let your lover connect, but don't lose yourself in others. Let your sage guide you, but don't hide in analysis. Each archetype holds power. Each one has wisdom. But no single one should run your life. When you recognize your archetypes, a few things start to happen. 5107. You gain clarity. You begin to see why you make the choices you do and where those choices are leading you. 5108. You feel less stuck. You realize that your identity isn't fixed. You're not just the strong one or the helper. You are capable of more than one story. 5109. You gain compassion for yourself, for others. Because now you understand that everyone is just trying to live out a pattern, often unconsciously. This work is subtle but transformational. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What pattern am I living out?" And eventually, "What story do I truly want to live?" Because here's the truth most people never realize. If you don't become aware of the archetypes driving your life, they will control you. But if you do become aware of them, you can collaborate with them. You become more than a role. You become a whole conscious being, capable of moving through life with choice, depth, and self-trust. So the question isn't whether archetypes shape your life. They already are. The question is, will you let them control you from the shadows, or will you bring them into the light and learn to guide your own path? Not everyone answers the call to become who they truly are. Some ignore it, some silence it, some never hear it at all. because the noise of conformity is louder. And while ignoring your true self might bring short-term peace, it comes at a devastating long-term cost. You begin to disappear from your own life. Carl Jung was clear about this. When you refuse the path of individuation, when you cling to masks, avoid your shadow, and stay loyal to patterns that no longer serve you, you don't escape suffering, you guarantee it. But it doesn't always show up as dramatic collapse. It creeps in quietly, subtly, over years, a low-grade dissatisfaction that no success can fix. A relationship that looks good but feels hollow. A deep restlessness you can't explain. An emotional numbness that becomes your default setting. And often, people dismiss these feelings. They say, I just need a vacation. Or, I should be grateful, my life's fine. Or worse, maybe something's wrong with me, but nothing is wrong with you. You're just living too far from your truth. The farther you drift from your inner self, the louder your unconscious becomes. At first, it whispers through anxiety, irritability, or fatigue. Then it speaks louder, through emotional outbursts, panic attacks, or failed relationships. And if still ignored, it shouts through depression, chronic illness, or existential crisis. The psyche will not be silenced forever. It will find a way to be heard, even if it has to break you open to do it. There's a reason people repeat the same toxic relationships. There's a reason some keep sabotaging their own success. There's a reason you can't shake that feeling of emptiness, no matter how much you achieve. These aren't random events. They're signs that your soul is not on board with the life you're living. You're not aligned. You're performing. And deep down, you know it. Another tragic symptom of non-individuation is resentment. When you abandon yourself to please others, a quiet anger begins to build. You might project it outward, blaming your partner, your boss, your parents, society, or you turn it inward into shame, self-doubt, and depression. But no matter where you aim it, resentment is always a signal. I have betrayed something important inside me. The most dangerous outcome, though, is existential deadness. You wake up, go through the motions, meet expectations, tick off tasks. But you don't feel alive. You don't feel you. And maybe you're so used to it that you've forgotten what aliveness feels like. But here's what you need to know. This isn't the way it has to be. You can still turn toward yourself. You can still choose the harder path, the one that leads inward. It won't be easy. Individuation never is. But the alternative is a life of quiet decay. And you were not born for that. You were born to feel, to grow, to know yourself, and to live from that knowing. So if something in you has been aching, pay attention. It's not a flaw. It's not a weakness. It's the beginning of your return. What does it actually mean to be yourself? Not in the cliché bumper sticker way, not as a trendy slogan or spiritual buzzword, but in the raw, honest, lived experience of waking up every day and knowing, I am no longer pretending. That's not a destination. It's a lifelong process, a choice you make again and again. Because becoming yourself isn't something that just happens one day. It's not a sudden revelation. It's not a moment where all the confusion vanishes and clarity takes over. No. It's a slow, often painful, sometimes beautiful process of undoing everything you were never meant to be, and remembering everything you always were. To be yourself means to let go of the masks you were taught to wear. It means questioning the beliefs you inherited but never chose. It means giving yourself permission to be complex, contradictory, and incomplete. It means realizing you are not a brand, you are not a resume, you are not a role. You are a living, breathing, feeling, changing human being. And you don't need to be consistent to be authentic. Most people are terrified of this. Terrified that if they take off the mask, they'll be rejected. That if they show their flaws, they'll be abandoned. That if they stop performing, they'll be forgotten. But here's the paradox. The more real you are, the more magnetic you become. Not to everyone, but to the right people. To those who are also tired of pretending. To those who are seeking truth, not perfection. Realness creates resonance. And in that resonance, connection happens. Healing happens. Life finally begins to feel real. To be yourself means to face your fears and still move forward. To own your shadow and still love who you see in the mirror. To stop waiting for permission to be whole. It means saying, I don't need to be liked by everyone. I need to be true to myself. And it means recognizing that your flaws are not obstacles to love. They're doorways to it. The people who will love you the most deeply are the ones who see your imperfections and stay. And that includes you. But make no mistake, this path takes courage. It asks you to walk away from what's familiar, to disappoint people who only know the version of you that pleased them. To break cycles, confront truths, and begin again. That's why most people don't do it. It's easier to conform, easier to stay numb, easier to wear the mask. But easy is not the same as free, and safety is not the same as wholeness. So here's the real question. Are you willing to be free? Free to feel what you feel, free to want what you want, free to speak, to rest, to create, to walk away, to change, to rise. Free to live a life that actually belongs to you, not one designed to impress, not one built on obligation, not one filtered through fear.